Welcome to my channel. Welcome to the Incredible Unique channel. Hoping to bring you the best, nothing but the best. So today we'll look at action potentials, excitable cells, neurons and muscles, and anything related to this. Before I begin, I want you to understand the term action potential and excitable cells, neurons, muscles, and other related terms that are in this course. So in our physiology, we'll start by defining terms like resting membrane potential. What is RM? Resting membrane potential. Resting membrane potential is the potential difference across the cell membrane when the cell is not stimulated, meaning when the cell is at rest. When the cell is at rest, action potential won't take place unless there is a stimuli. Let's look at one of our examples of this graph. This graph presents the action potential. Maybe we'll understand it better using this graph. And before we even look at this graph, we have to understand what is action potential. Action potential, this is a stimuli that excites a cell. So any cell in the body can undergo action potential. Muscle cell and neuron cells. That's why we say excitable cells. These are examples of excitable cells, and we know examples of muscle cells that we know. There is cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle. Look into details of in those such things. So we'll start by looking at action potential. Any cell can undergo action potential as long as there's a stimuli. Let's take for instance a stimuli. It can be like, for this an example, the stimuli is sodium ions. The sodium gates, there are activation gates and inactivation gates. So when the activation gates are closed on the cell, which means the inactivation gates will still be open, meaning there will be still cations and ions coming in and out of the cell. But now we'll just focus on two cations, which is sodium and potassium. So we'll look at sodium. So as sodium will be entering into the cell, in the deactivating gates which are closed. So as it be entering the cell, they will reach a certain stimuli. A certain stimuli, as you see, there are different types of fire but couldn't reach a threshold, which brings to us a definition. We have to define what is threshold. Threshold, this is the minimum amount of energy required for the cell to reach its action potential. It's either a none or no rule. What do we mean by that? It's either a cell will undergo an action potential or it won't. So if it fails to reach a threshold voltage, meaning it won't undergo action potential. Yesterday for this cell, the threshold is negative 55. So as we see, as the sodium will be entering into this cell, into a certain cell, let's give an example of a neuron cell. As sodium ions entering in that cell, the cell will become more positive. As we should know that a cell is always having a negative charge. So the cell becoming more positive, as it will be becoming more positive from its resting membrane potential, which is negative 70. As it will be entering into the cell, the stimulus can fire an action potential or cannot. As long as those sodiums entering into the cell manage to reach the threshold potential, an action potential will form. As it reaches the threshold, there will be this fire. The way it heats up until it reaches the action potential, which is positive 40. And then as sodium ions be going out, while the inactivation gates have closed, the activation gates will open, which causing the potassium ions will be entering into the cell. As it will be entering into the cell, as it be going out of the cell, to cause the cell to be more and more negative, which will cause repolarization. So let's get this right. The sodium, we are causing the cell to be more positive, which causes depolarization. But potassium gates take long to close than sodium gates. So that's why it will even surpass the resting membrane potential, causing hyperpolarization, which then as time goes by, it will go back to a resting state. So what should we pick up? We should understand that action potential has both depolarization, and hyperpolarization, which takes back to resting potential. So this can continue until the cell is at rest. Let's until the cell is at rest. So our minimum resting potential is negative, as we said earlier, and it's in the range between negative 70 millivolts to negative 90 millivolts. This range can vary, so it can be between, or it can be negative 70 millivolts or between. So let's look at factors that can cause the action potential. One of them is the unequal distribution of electrons in the cell. Let's look at examples of ions in the cell. You find that sodium ions, there are 4 millimoliters in intracellular fluid, but in the extracellular fluid, which is outside the cell, you find that it's 140 millivolts, which making it unequal. And then you know that potassium will be 135 in the intracellular matrix, but it's 3.5 positive volt, that's being positive in the extracellular matrix, which is causing an equal distribution of these ions. So which leads to action membrane potential. Some of the factors that can cause the action membrane potential is the selective permeability of the cell membrane, which means that the membrane is able to allow certain molecules or certain ions, cations, to enter into the cell. So it might allow certain anions or cations that will cause the cell to be more and more negative, or which it can allow such sodium or potassium that will allow the cell to be more and more positive. Some other factors that contribute, there were the hormones and some more of proteins in the intracellular fluid. Let's for examples, endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth, and the Golgi apparatus. So those are proteins, and they are more inside the cell, which is causing it more and more negative, giving it a negative membrane, a negative resting membrane potential. So what's our pickup on all this? You should understand that every cell can be stimulated and every cell can undergo action membrane potentials. These action membrane potentials, they are the ones that are used clinically, and they are the ones that help. They're the ones that play most of the roles in our daily life. For us to be able to move and react is because we have reached an action membrane potential, and all those